Welcome to Lessons in Dyslexic Thinking, conversations with the world's most inspiring dyslexics, where we find out what dyslexic thinking is and how each of us can employ it to change the world. Today we are delighted to be at BBC Studios at the Natural History Unit in Bristol, and I'm so excited to be joined by zoologist and wildlife presenter McCubbin. Lovely to be with you here today. Megan, you've used your dyslexic thinking skills to help us understand the brilliance of the natural world. As a conservationist, you're teaching us how to look after our amazing world, and you're also passionate about helping the world to understand the brilliance of dyslexic thinking. You've said, I'm very open about being dyslexic and the massive benefits it can bring, and also a lot of the struggles in the conventional system that dyslexic brings too. I'm a big advocate for neurodiverse voices because you need a diverse group of people to have diversity of ideas and solutions, and we need solutions and ideas now more than ever. A very, very wonderful statement. It's lovely to have you here today. Can you tell me a little bit more about how dyslexic thinking helps you to do what you do and what you do?
Well, dyslexic thinking, I think, impacts me every single day in many different ways, some of which I'm aware of, some of which I'm probably not so much aware of. But my main job, I suppose, is a science communicator, and that involves digesting lots of new science. It could be about climate change, it could be about biodiversity loss, it could be, well, biodiversity plus. Not as often as I would like it to be about that, but it could be about a whole range of different things. And it's my job to digest that information and kind of reorganize it in my brain and try to get a new audience to care about it as much as I do. So I try using my dyslexic thinking to engage audiences, empower them, motivate them to make the world a little bit of a better place. And I think it goes a long way, actually, having a dyslexic mind, because I'm able to look at scientific information, strip away the complexity that I don't need. I don't even see it half the time. And I can pinpoint the bits that are exciting for an audience and the bits that aren't necessarily needed, the methodology in a study, for example, and I can put it together like a puzzle, and I can visually see a story, and I can hear how I might present it or I might write it, and I can kind of get a feel, actually, in a weird sense, for what I want to do with that story. And I think that is all about dyslexia. I think that's very much a dyslexic trait. And then I just try and share that with the world, whatever's in my head, and try and get it out there to a bigger audience.
It's a fantastic description of dyslexic thinking. We work a lot with Maggie Adair-Pocock, the space scientist, and she says exactly the same thing. She can look at really complex scientific information and simplify it and bring it to life. Do you think that that's a skill that you've always had, that ability to kind of really get to the nub of something?
I think perhaps in a more simplistic sense, yes. Perhaps reading complicated science, no, that wasn't something I was doing as a teenager, because I didn't necessarily believe in myself at that point in time and believe that I could be a part of science and actually understand these very highly academic papers that were being published by the brightest minds in our society. I guess with stories, with film, with audiobooks, all of that kind of stuff, I was very good at really focusing on the exciting bits and kind of forgetting a lot of the information, but really clinging on to the strict storyline. And then that kind of progressed as my love of natural history kind of progressed and deepened, and my confidence in myself grew. And I was able to realise, no, actually, science is for me. I can do it. And I can actually look at these very clever papers, which are written by very clever people, some of which happen to be dyslexic themselves. And I can apply that kind of skill to this, and I love doing it. I think dyslexic people have a curious mind by nature. We're fascinated by things. For me, it's living things. I want to understand about it. I'm just a bit nosy. I like, sticking my nose into a ladybird's business and figuring out what it's up to. And if I can kind of get someone else to do that and love ladybirds as much as I do, then that's kind of a win.
Exploring, it's another very, very big dyslexic thinking skill, and questioning and looking at things differently as well is something that is a very strong talent that we have. Do you think your love of what you do and animals was there from a very early age?
Yeah, I think so. I think every human being is born with the intrinsic interest in the life around them. I think as kids, we've all have a story of, following a butterfly around the garden, or, digging up and finding woodlice or earthworms, whatever it may be. Some perhaps take it a little bit further than others. I mean, I was late to class because I was picking up earthworms off the path when it rained because I didn't want anyone to tread on them. Well, it was either that or I wanted to be late to math class, one of the two, I don't know. But I was always fascinated by things. I wanted to know how they worked, why they worked, what they were up to. And then as I kind of matured as a scientist, it was also about how to protect it, because when you love something so much, you quickly become aware of the threats that faces, and then it becomes more about tackling those threats in order to protect it. My love of natural history has always been there. I think, there is a massive connection with dyslexic minds to, like, as you said, exploring, but also empathy. And I've got a lot of empathy. I'm always told that I'm perhaps too empathetic, especially when it comes to animals. I feel big emotions when I watch kind of the big, gorgeous documentaries that Sir David presents. I feel a lot of empathy for their situations and climate change, and kind of I feel that weight on myself. I suppose that's kind of what motivates me to do what I do, is because of that heightened sense of empathy perhaps, but also that kind of curiosity about life.
I think that empathy piece is so incredibly important in what you do. We've just done a talk together with BBC talking about dyslexic thinking and its place in BBC, particularly with nature. How important do you think having that empathy is in terms of how you then get stories across to the world? Because we have to have empathy and love for our environment and our animals in order to be able to share that with others.
Yeah, and I think that comes in twofold. Like, I have to be able to put myself in the place of whatever animal or plant I'm kind of talking about at that time. What information would that species need to have out there in order for someone to care for it? So I try and tailor it in that way, but I'm also thinking about the audience and kind of trying to, how will the audience feel with this information? How can I, if it's a sad story, make them feel lighter at the end by offering a solution? How can I make them laugh? How can I kind of connect with them even more? So I think that goes for in two ways, the subject you're talking about, but also the people that are watching or listening or reading on the other end of the screen or the pages.
Yeah, the empathy and emotional intelligence is about those two things, isn't it? It's about you understanding, but how do you also get others to understand it? And it's a very, very important subject that we need to get everybody to understand. Do you think that visualising is a strength of yours as well? I mean, when you're making films and you're interacting with animals, how important do you think being able to sort of see where things are going or sense where things are going is?
It's vital. It's so vital. I mean, I'm a very visual learner, as you might have guessed, as a dyslexic. So I see things very clearly in my mind, but I think a lot of people do that, and imagery is so very important for so many different reasons. I always say when I'm taking photographs, actually, that you can show a photograph to an audience. It doesn't matter what language they speak. You can make them feel the same thing by storytelling in that way. If you're showing an emotive subject, if you are, using light, you can really kind of paint a picture, with your camera, in order to get a response. You're trying to evoke a reaction from somebody. That reaction could be anything. It could be to go and kind of sign a petition. It could be to, learn about an animal, or it could be just to kind of raise awareness to talk to your next door neighbour about a particular issue. It doesn't matter what it is. Documentaries and photography have the ability to do that, no matter where you live, no matter what language. You can't help but look at a baby animal being born without feeling that draw of connection. You can't help but look at an animal suffering without feeling like you want to look after it and protect it. And I think no matter what language you speak, it doesn't matter. You can see that without any music, without any narration, and you can get an audience to feel something. And that is why kind of natural history programming is so important, because it taps into that really primal sense that humans have.
Yeah, 100%. It's absolutely amazing. And I think, again, tapping into the dyslexic thinking skills. I know a huge number of dyslexics feel very passionate about being change makers, and you've talked a lot about that in terms of emotional intelligence. What do you think it is about the way you are and your career that is going to really drive change?
I don't know. It's just the drive to make the world a bit of a better place. You know, if I can make the world even slightly better place than how it was when I arrived, then I'll kind of be happy with that. I think, again, it comes back to when you love something so much. Again, it could be the butterfly in the garden, it could be the earthworms on the path. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be a tiger in a forest. When you love something, you're so driven to want to protect it. And I'll try any means possible to connect with as larger audience that I can in order to instill that same kind of love and devotion, because it's not only about protecting them, it's also about protecting ourselves. You know, we have to remember that we are living creatures, we are part of the climate, we are part of biodiversity, and we have an integral role to play in this situation, and we can't kind of forget our place in that. And I think too often as humans we do. So if I can remind people, not only for the sake of biodiversity and the climate, but also for themselves, so that they can reground themselves to nature, reground themselves to where they came from, they often find that actually their connection to their mental health, their physical health will improve, and you can, not only hope to try and change the world for them, but also to kind of change the world for the life that lives around them as well.
And you mentioned earlier on some incredible research that's happening around dolphins, which I found absolutely fascinating. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, dolphins are brilliant mammals. They are highly intelligent, so there's lots of research going into them all the time. We know, for example, that they have a sense of self, so they're one of the only creatures that we know of. There's a handful of them, but can look in a mirror and recognise that's me as an individual, like I see me. And in order to do that, what the scientists did was they drew a dot on the back of the dolphin, and rather than kind of going to look at the mirror and thinking it was another individual kind of trying to play or perhaps fight or look behind the mirror to see what that other individual could be, what they did was they approached it and they turned around to look at the spot on their back that they otherwise couldn't see, indicating that they knew that reflection was them. And another thing scientists are trying to decode is their communication. So dolphins and cetaceans, so whales, dolphins and porpoises, communicate through echolocation, these clicks that are emitted out into the environment, and then they come back and labels them to determine how far away things are. They use it for hunting, but also communication. And they've noted that a certain order of clicks, certain frequency of clicks per individual sort of resonates to a naming system. So, an individual will be greeted by a particular click by all members of its family, and it's thought, I don't want to anthropomorphize, put human emotions on it and say that they've got specific names for each other, but
it sounds like they have.
It kind of sounds like, there's a similar structure going on there on how they reference each other as individuals. So there's always so much more to learn about an intelligent world, and just because like dyslexics being out of the loop a lot of the time and people not understanding our intelligence, even though we are very intelligent, we can't dismiss other animals for that intelligence as well. Just because it's not within our parameters to understand it doesn't necessarily mean there's not a lot going on in there.
And collaboration and teamwork, something that is really, really important for dyslexics. It's important to delegate the things we're not good at, but also very much focus on our strengths. But do you find that in the world that you work in, are there lots of dyslexic people that you'll surround yourself with, and how does that work?
Yeah, I think a lot of dyslexic people are drawn to television or the media in general. Again, dyslexic people are very good communicators, and we're quite artistic and creative, so we quite enjoy kind of making content, making television shows, again, just being in that industry where you're able to kind of make a product, and something that's so visual, like natural history television is a prime example of that. Again, including the empathy, we have empathy with the animals, so a lot of dyslexics are drawn especially to natural history television. So you will find a lot of us within the BBC Natural History unit, and it's wonderful, and it's a really supportive place, because if you're confident enough and willing enough to talk about it, you'll find a very kind of supportive network around you of other people that will come out and say, well, I'm dyslexic too, and this is how my dyslexia affects me, or this is how I'd like to work. And it's brilliant. In the last year or so, I've had a couple of productions just before they've started, come up to me and say, we recognise you're dyslexic. How would you like your scripts printed? Would you like a specific font? Would you like a specific colour of paper? And to have that option to feel seen and noted like that, yeah, it's really special just to be asked. It makes you feel kind of seen and heard, which you don't get everywhere, or I certainly didn't when I was younger or have worked in other industries. So it's a brilliant place to be, a very supportive place to be. But again, it's just finding that confidence that enough of us are willing to speak up and talk about it so we can kind of make that change for everyone.
And what would you suggest for people who aren't open with their workplace about dyslexia? What would you suggest that they do? Because being open and talking about it just unlocks so much for us, doesn't it?
Yeah, it allows you to see so many more solutions. And I think people will be surprised about how many of their work colleagues are also, have the same kind of mental battle about whether to share their dyslexia or not. I've always been open about it. Actually, no, that's a lie. I haven't always been open about it. I'll take that back immediately. I wasn't open about it in university, and I wish I was. So I had extra time at school and at college, and it was very much the case of feeling like a punishment at the end of the year when everyone got to go out and celebrate and I was left stuck in a room with my 25% extra time. And whilst obviously that was better for my grades to have that time, being sat in that room isolated in a dark room with like 2 other people, when you can hear other people jumping up and down outside excited for the summer holidays was not a nice experience.
Yeah, it's not great for self-esteem, is it?
Not great for self-esteem. And then when I went to university, I decided not to disclose it. And I didn't have extra time, and I still did pretty well. I still got a 2-1. Probably could have got a first had I disclosed it and got extra time. And I regret it. And I think I've learnt from that moment to always share it, because if you can share it and make the workplace a more accessible place for everybody, then go for it. Start that conversation. You'd be so surprised by how many other people will be willing to talk with you about it and find that kind of support that's needed. Because we're all on a spectrum somewhere, and we have to celebrate our differences, because actually that's what makes us wonderful. You can't, like I said before in that quote, if everyone thought the same, then we'd all have the same thoughts and ideas, and that would be boring and nothing would ever get done. We have to have a diversity of minds to have a diversity of ideas.
Yeah, totally. And I think actually when you start looking at each neurodiversity, whether it's dyslexia or whichever, and you actually look at the strengths associated with it, it actually makes being open and talking about it a lot easier, which is why having conversations like this is so incredibly important.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
So let me take you back to your school days. How was school for you, and when did you discover you were dyslexic?
School was hard. Yeah, really hard, especially at the beginning when I didn't quite understand what was going on. I was in a junior school and I had a teacher there who, I don't know whether she recognised any dyslexic traits in me. I'm not sure she even knew what dyslexia was. And I heard conversations referring to the table I was sitting on as the stupid table. And that, as a 4 or 5-year-old, really,
not good.
really hit. And I can remember that conversation, so clearly today as I did back then. And I remember hours and hours painfully sitting with my mum on the way to school in the car, going over my times tables and my spellings. And we did this every day, and it was exhausting. It was exhausting to get me to open the book, because I knew I couldn't do it as well as everyone else could, and I would just want to shut down. I just want to say, no, I'm just going to give up, because I know I can't. And she would get me to open the book, and I'd go over my spellings, and I'd go over my times tables, and then I'd get them. And then 2 minutes later, they were gone. And it was as if I'd never seen that word before. And it was just that kind of short-term memory kind of thing. I wasn't able to retain that information. It was a real struggle, and she remembers those car journeys and how painful they were. I ended up getting my dyslexia diagnosis when I was 7, and I moved schools. I'm very fortunate that I was able to do that, and I was very privileged to go to a school which had a dyslexia teacher. So I spent a couple hours with her. I missed out on my language lessons because they tried to put me in French for a while, and they said, well, you're not very good at that, maybe best focus on English. So I didn't do any languages. I didn't do a language GCSE. And I had my dyslexic support lessons instead, and I also had dyslexic support outside of school. So I was very fortunate that I had that opportunity to go and to be able to build the skills that I needed to recognise that it wasn't my fault. I just learned differently, And it's okay that I don't fit in with the conventional system. It's not me. It's just I don't learn how I'm being taught. And I had to relearn what they wanted me to learn in my way.
That must have made a huge difference to how you felt about yourself after being on the stupid table.
Yeah, I did. I mean, it's still something I struggle with, because at the moment there are times when I do something that's very dyslexic and I still feel that frustration with myself, because that's my go-to instinct, or at least it was when I was younger. But I was so lucky that I always had that connection to animals. And when I was frustrated with myself, what really motivated me to actually get into science and be like, actually, no, I can do it, and made me really want to do it, was relationships that I had with animals. You know, my bedroom was filled with everything. I had snakes, I had cockroaches, praying mantises, I had hamsters and poodles, and everything else. But I also kind of learned how to fly owls, and I was very lucky that I had animals around me, because if I didn't have that and the relationships that I built with those, you know, really special individuals, then I might not have been motivated enough to be to not give up on science. And that's the thing. I think it's having something you're passionate about and grabbing onto it, and don't let it go. Don't let it go. Because if you do, you might lose your motivation for it. So grab onto it, and you kind of just, you know, got no choice then but to believe in yourself when you're so passionate about something.
Yeah, I think so many dyslexics become absolute experts at the things they're passionate about because they just want to learn more and more and more. And that can very often turn into a career.
Yeah, but it's hard at school because, like, biology was like cells, and it was, you know, stuff that actually, it wasn't zoology, it wasn't animal behaviour, it wasn't that kind of stuff. So it's also recognising that, okay, just because you're not learning what you want to learn now doesn't mean, you know, if you try and apply yourself and learn how you learn with those lessons and the way they're being taught, then eventually you'll get to a point where you can learn the subjects in depth that you want to, and you can kind of tailor it for yourself.
Yeah, because I know at science, everybody sees it as a very academic subject. And when you're taking exams in it, it is actually a very academic subject. But in the real world, it is about creativity and imagination and finding different ways of doing things. So just having that knowledge that science can lead to something like your career is a really important thing for kids, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to think so. You know, I'd like to think that there are loads of kids out there that are kind of feel confident enough to use their creativity in academia. Academia is an amazing place, but it isn't, you know, men in lab coats anymore. It's a lot more than that. It's a lot more, you know, celebrated. That creative streak that runs through it, that communication, science communication field, is much more appreciated than it was. I mean, we've got social media now, so we're able to kind of connect with those audiences and build up social media science followings and things like that. So there are a lot more opportunities, I think, out there because of the technology that's there for dyslexic people to be able to communicate to a wider group.
Yeah, there's so many different ways to communicate. It isn't just the sort of traditional route, is it? And tell me a little bit about your exam choice, because I know you did veer off science for your GCSEs, didn't you, and then came back to it later.
Yeah, I just didn't believe in myself enough, and I look back on it and I feel really sad about that. Yeah, so I decided not to do science. I mean, when I was at school, you had the choice of, well, you didn't have the choice. You were put into double science or triple science, depending on your grades. And I was in double science because my science grades were not that good, because I wasn't learning the science that I thought, I was really interested in. And again, didn't have the skills to be able to learn it in the correct way. So I steered away from science, and I went down the arts and drama route. Little did I know that having experience in drama was very helpful. And weirdly, whilst I couldn't remember my times tables, I could remember scripts. I could do a Shakespeare monologue, no problem. But you get me to learn my times tables, you had no hope. But I could do that, and I enjoyed doing that. And then I went into my A-levels, and I had to choose the wrong A-levels because I'd chosen the wrong GCSEs. But by that point, I'd recognised that what I really wanted to do was zoology, and in order to get there, I needed A-level in biology. And then I had to do a foundation year in biological science, and I went to the University of Liverpool to do that. And then I went on to do my zoology. So it took me a little bit longer, but that was okay. I'm glad I didn't put pressure on myself. In that period of time, I was quite accepting of it. And it was worth the extra years to get to where I wanted to be. But it's just not putting that pressure on yourself.
And what do you think your 7-year-old self would think about where you are now?
Probably disbelief, I'd imagine. Confusion, perhaps. I don't know what I wanted to be when I was that age. I mean, I quite like ballet. I wasn't very good at it by any means, but like I'd imagine myself more in kind of like a creative industry, I suppose, which this is, but certainly not kind of natural history. Again, just because of that lack of confidence. But if I could go back, and I've thought about this question quite a lot, to be honest. I mean, last year I published my second book, and I'm writing again at the minute. And if I told myself, 7-year-old me that was literally terrified of books, when someone would hand one to me, I would have so much anxiety opening that page that I just wouldn't want to open it. I would want to put it down, forget it in a corner somewhere, and just ignore it like it wasn't even in the room. It was like I was allergic to books. It was horrible. But to be able to tell my 7-year-old self that, hey, I've written my second one, I'm actually writing my third. I don't think I would have believed me at all, or I probably would have had a panic attack and hidden in the corner of the room.
That's fantastic. And just going back to the career and what you do, what do you think are the 3 most important skills that you need to be a nature presenter, and do they fit with dyslexic thinking?
Well, the big one, communication. So absolutely, that's a huge part of dyslexic thinking. The second one, definitely teamwork. A lot of the time on productions, you see people in front of the camera, but there are hundreds of people working behind it, people with all different kinds of skill sets that are able to kind of connect the cameras to satellites, to be able to produce and write the scripts, to be able to research, to be able to go out and talk to contributors and get the stories out. It's an absolute mammoth effort by a lot of people, and you kind of see the tip of the iceberg on it when it gets to screen. So teamwork and being able to kind of I guess that social intelligence, being able to kind of really get to know your colleagues and kind of support them and vice versa is really critical. So I'd say, yeah, that's probably a dyslexic thinking.
Definitely.
And then it's just a passion for the subject. It's a love of what you're talking about, and I think that kind of comes across on screen. Especially in natural history, I always resonate more with people who have got a passion for natural history when they're presenting the subject. So it definitely helps to kind of, it doesn't matter necessarily whether you've got a degree in zoology or an academic background, but to have a love for it, to be excited by it, to have enthusiasm for it, I think is the most critical thing.
And if you're a parent and your child is struggling at school, is passionate about animals but not doing very well academically, what would you say to that parent and that child?
Take them out. Take them out to the woods. Take them out to your local stream. Take them out to see animals. Just make sure that you can harness that connection away from school, because whilst school it can be challenging, it can be great for many different reasons as well, it's so important what you do outside. Really harnessing those passions, regardless of what that passion is for that child, I think is really, really important. And I had just as much of an education outside of school as I had inside of school. And I think by exposing, your child to lots of different things, whether it be climbing a tree or looking under a log or, going to your local safari park, whatever it may be, just try and enhance that. Be curious about what they're curious about and try to get excited with them. You can do projects that you think they might enjoy at home. You get them to draw their favorite, depends obviously the age of the child, but get them to draw, get them to engage in different ways that suit their mind and is one of their strengths. And do it together. Having support and not feeling like you're alone is always good.
Yeah, I think there's so much emphasis on doing well at school and spending your time at home cramming for exams or cramming for tests, and really it's just about getting out there and doing what you love and having that experience outside of school as well, isn't it?
Absolutely, because then when you go back into school, actually chances are you'll do much better because you're calmer in yourself, your mental health is increased because you've connected to what you really enjoy doing, you've had some time outside, some fresh air, and we know that being around wildlife massively increases our mental health, whether you're passionate about it or not. Being around the garden birds, hearing them singing, massively increases our serotonin, our happy hormone, makes us feel good, and then we're much more productive when it comes to school or work. So taking that time out to reconnect is so important for everyone.
Yeah, just listening to bird sound changes your mood instantly, doesn't it?
Yeah, massively. It's the best thing to listen to.
Your dyslexic thinking has already taken you to incredible places to film in the natural world. What's the favourite thing that you filmed? Is there one or are there many?
Oh, that's really tricky. Do you know what? One of the most rewarding things I've ever filmed was actually the first documentary I ever did, which was BBC Three. It was called Undercover Tourist, and it was in 2017, and it was all about how close tourists could come to the illegal wildlife trade. So before I went into TV presenting, which, by the way, never imagined I'd do, even after university, it was something I loved, but I didn't know I'd ever get the opportunity to do it. I was going more down the science route. And I'd spent 3 months working in China as a bear behavioural specialist for an amazing charity called Animals Asia. And I was working with bears that were rescued from the bear bar farming industry. And it was about rehabilitation. It was about giving them the kind of time and space to be bears again after going through a really, really traumatic experience. But I'd never been to a bear bile farm and seen the actual issue. And then when I got back home, a friend of mine at the BBC said, "We've got this series, Undercover Tourist, and we had a story that's fallen through. Have you got any ideas? We need to move quickly on it." And I said, "Well, I've just got back from China. What about going out and doing something about bear bar farming?" And I think it was a couple of weeks later, I was on a plane to Vietnam and I found myself in the middle of a bear bile farm, which was harrowing.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah, harrowing. But it felt important. It felt important to be there because it was happening and not many people knew about it. And to make a film that could raise awareness of that issue, communicate that to a wider audience, but also offer people, a solution, something they could do about it. Supporting Animals Asia by, being aware of what products we buy as consumers. It felt good for that animal, for that situation to be seen. And yeah, that was probably one of the proudest, I suppose, films that I've made, even though it was probably the most harrowing to film. Obviously, Springwatch is an absolute honour and a joy to film every single time, getting to talk to people who know a lot more about things than I do and getting to sponge information off them, and kind of enthuse people with, natural history in the UK, because we have so much of it here. And of course, it's brilliant to see things overseas, but, I love what we've got on our doorstep. We're so lucky to have it, even though there's a lot more work to be done, don't get me wrong. We've got to appreciate what's here, and we've got a lot of it, so it's great. It's great to be part of Springwatch that celebrates that.
And that's a great lead into the next question, which is, where do you think your dyslexic thinking will take you next with what you do?
Oh, that's a very good question. So I am starting a podcast with my partner. So we're kind of exploring new ways to communicate natural history news, as well as kind of having a bit of fun with it, perhaps making it a little bit more kind of lighthearted, a bit more jokey, a little bit more, I don't know what the right word is, but we're exploring that at the minute.
Sounds great.
It should be really good fun. So that should be coming out in the next week or two, and then lots more filming in the pipeline, as well as writing, which I'm still shocked that I'm doing, and it still fills me with dread sometimes. But then I, I look back and think, oh, I've done it already. I can definitely do it again. And I sit down, and once I'm in it, I actually really enjoy it. So who knows? I'm just, I'm kind of riding this wave and loving every minute of it. But just trying to do what I can whilst I can.
And what would be your biggest, boldest dream?
Ooh, that is a difficult one. So many different things. I would love to wake up one day. This is less about me, but I'd love to wake up one day, turn on my phone, look at the news, and only see positive environmental stories out there. That the world is recovering, that biodiversity is gaining, that the climate is getting better, I'd love us to reach that point where we're kind of there with our actions and solutions for our environment. That would be that's my ultimate aim, is to try and kind of reverse some of the negative stories that are going on.
So my last question for you, if you had one piece of advice for other dyslexics, what would it be?
Don't let other people's lack of understanding get you down. It's not you. It is often how people perceive dyslexia to be. And you're told time after time that it's your problem. There's something going on in your head. Actually, it's not. Yes, there is something going on in my head. I'm quite glad there's something going on in my head, because otherwise it'd be a boring place to be. But there's something going on in all of our heads. We're all on a spectrum somewhere. And just because we process information differently doesn't mean we should devalue ourselves. There's so much strength in dyslexic thinking, and I'm so proud to have it as a skill. I wouldn't change it for the world. But I just hope that more dyslexic people kind of are willing to talk about it, so that we can make the world a better place for young dyslexics still going through that school system, which still needs to change. But be confident in who you are, and just find out how you learn best and go for it.
That's a fantastic piece of advice. Thank you so much. It was really, really lovely chatting to you.
And thank you very much for having me.
This podcast is sponsored by Microsoft, who, like us, are passionate about empowering dyslexic thinking. Check out their brilliant immersive reader, free across several Microsoft 365 apps, which helps dyslexic thinkers to fly, by clicking the Microsoft link in the podcast notes. And if you'd like to find out more about what dyslexic thinking skills are and how to recognise them in schools, at work or at home, you can take our free training now. Empowering Dyslexic Thinking in Schools, available on Microsoft Learn, and Empowering Dyslexic Thinking at Work, available on LinkedIn Learning. And please subscribe so you don't miss out on future lessons in dyslexic thinking.